Hey everybody, welcome back to New Videos channel, and today we look into a simple Tailwind trick that might help you writing less duplicate code and making it a bit more amazing. And yes, it's related to CSS variables. Here we go. No matter if you hate or love Tailwind CSS, it is out there and is used by a vast majority of people, not even saying AI and of course a lot of UI libraries. So if you have to write Tailwind, no matter why, you might do a few things that I also did a couple of times, like writing classes again and again, maybe also for different variants. But this is not even necessary. We can easily deduplicate the code with the help of a simple trick. So let's jump into demo applications, see what we want to build, very simple once again, and then see how we can improve and iterate on that. Our demo application is almost as minimal as possible. We have Nuxt.js running here, but as mentioned before, this also works in any other framework. We set Tailwind up. This is Tailwind CSS version 4, but the same idea also works in Tailwind CSS version 3 if you didn't upgrade yet. And that's kind of all we did here. Then we have an app.view, so basically our root component, which we'll have a look in a second. And what we do is we render an alert component here, pass in a type, and have a button to change that to another random type of alert. Pretty straightforward, I would say. And that's usually something we won't touch. The most interesting part is this alert.view component here. So if you have a look, of course, we have type, right? We have certain variants, we have props enabled, and then in the computer property, we say, okay, if the type is success, render this classes. For warning, it's this. For error, it's this. Info, it's that. And by default, of course, it's none of these types. That should never happen, but just in case we throw an error to, well, have that caught by our error tracking system. And then we apply the classes and we're all good. So how does the whole thing look in the browser? Let's get going. In the browser, this looks like this. Wait, let me zoom in a tiny bit. Here we go. That's it. And if we click on it, we get a random new alert title. And that's the whole story. Doesn't look too complicated, right? By the way, if you're wondering why there is no cursor pointer here on top of that button when I hover over it, well, different story, different video, linked as usual on the info box or down in the description. Check that out. But now back to the alert. So you might wonder, okay, this seems all fine, right? The code works, so what's the point of this video? And the main part I want to talk about is this here, right? We have some state based on a prop, and depending on that, we set a lot of classes. But if we notice, for example, the 100, it is the same for every single state, right? For success, for warning, for error, for info. And interestingly, well, they also use the same type of color throughout the scenarios here. So in a way, this is quite duplicate text. And we even go further. What if this should be like themable, like stylable in a way? This isn't easily possible. So then we would start like, okay, let's pass some classes. So I don't know, this component would get another type from the parent, something like success class, warning class. And this, of course, leaves the whole component up for any kind of customization, but that also means too much flexibility. What I'm going to show in this video is to change only the things that should be customizable and flexible while keeping that angle and that degree of freedom easily. And how we do that is pretty simple. The answer is CSS variables. Tailwind CSS was always into CSS variables, but especially with Tailwind v4, this even improved because now all our colors are also available as CSS variables. And of course, the support for that through arbitrary expressions worked already beforehand. So what we're going to do is pretty simple. Let's start here. We say, okay, here is text green, BG green, and so on, so on. So why not having a variable for each of these types? Let's say alert backgrounds. We have alert border and alert text, right? So far, so good. Now we can define these as we want. So we could say we give any kind of color in there. Let's remove this part here and say, I don't know, alert BG is, for example, green. And alert border could be light green. And alert text should be black. Okay. So if we now say we have this, we can technically just take that and for now, testing wise, pass that all the way down here, not into our classes, but of course into our style part, right? So we apply all of that here. We say, all right, no problem. We don't even need the quotation. We remove this and we're done. And let's make sure we comment it out here for now, or we just say we return an empty string and that's fine, and see what our alert looks like now. And the answer is, well, it doesn't look like anything. That's kind of makes sense because, well, it just uses the default, which is the black text, but it has no background because we didn't assign it anywhere. Let's do this. And the best part is this can be part of a static declaration. So let's move this also to a static one because we don't need anything else here. And now what we could do is we could say, okay, BG, so for the background. And in here, in Tailwind CSS v3, we just use the square brackets, and in Tailwind v4, it's still the case, but for CSS variables, we just use the round ones. And now you can just say alert BG. So now we say, okay, the background should be depending on the alert background. And that's all. If we now move to the browser, we see, oh yeah, that's applied. That was pretty straightforward. So we can do the same actually for, of course, our border. So we say border dash dash alert border, and of course, text dash dash alert text. And that's all. If now our variables fit text border, we can also once again go to the browser and see perfect. Text didn't change. The border is here. The background is there. Now, of course, to make this more flexible and depending on the type, what we can do is we go back to the code, we keep the static declaration, and of course, this should go into a computer property. So let's say alert CSS vars or alert vars, if we want to name it like that. So instead having the classes here, we can just say alert vars. We don't have to switch it over. We can keep that as we had before. And then we start, of course, moving that over. So also for warning, for error, and for info. Let me quickly do that. All right, and last but not least, we also want to add the alert variables down here, but not as a normal string, but actually as property that we bind through view. So that's actually fully flexible. And now if we check out our browser, then we see the following. We see, okay, that works. It could be a bit more accessible, right? But the whole thing works fine. Now, there's only one catch because we're using Tailwind here, right? Now, we use some kind of custom CSS variables, and of course, we can put in like hex, RGB, octal, whatsoever colors in there. But we want to reuse our CSS variables from Tailwind, right? That's why we have them. So how we do that? And can we? And of course, the answer is yes, we can. But first, let's check out how this looks like in a browser here, because we already get a very important hint on how to do that. And I mentioned it before as well. If we scroll down here, we have in our main CSS layer theme. Let me make that a tiny bit bigger here. So in here, we have our CSS variables, because in Tailwind CSS v4, every single color is exposed as CSS variable. So we can use color red 100, red 500, red 700. It's not an issue at all. So let's once again do that, go over there and add it to our alerts. And in the code, all we could do is, okay, we use the var declaration here because we want to use another variable. And then we use dash dash color green, let's say 200. And same for the border, we can say, all right, let's take this and say color green, I don't know, 100 or 800. No, let's do 100. And the text, okay, that can stay black, or we can also say this should be, I don't know, 950. Something like that. And let's see how the green alert looks like in the browser now. And here we go. Okay, tiny bit different, right? You have to pick the right colors as well. But here we see, okay, these are just applied based on the colors that we've chosen. We can even change it here and say, okay, let's do 500. That's a bit closer to what we had before. And it won't be an issue. And that means we can also generalize it even more. Plus, it will all keep it very nice and production friendly, because what you should avoid in Tailwind CSS is concatenating your classes based on strings and dynamic properties, because then it can't be purged easily. But our class that we created here, well, that's easily purgeable because it relies on a custom variable. That means there's nothing to remove in production, so to say, while of course with the standard classes that might happen. But there's even something else that we can try, and that's related to data attributes. Let's check it out. So right now we define our classes based on our type here in the props. But what we could also do is leveraging what the, specs gave us. So let's use data attributes to define a simple data type up here straight away. And we set that to type. And now, instead of defining our variables here, so we can remove this part and also this part, we could say, okay, based on the data type, we set different classes, different variables, and so on. So this is another way to do that. Now we do is we say, okay, let's say const classes, and then we apply all the classes that are possible. So for example, we say, okay, there's a data type that is info, success, warning, error. So we say data type, and here we want to have the type in square brackets and say, if type is info, then we want to set certain values. So for example, to say the background should be dash dash color blue 500 or any other CSS variable that you want to set, or also a static CSS class if you want to. So we take this as a custom variant to say, okay, for everything where this applies, that should be set. And eventually add also the classes to our component, in this case also through the vbind shorthand, and we're fine. To spare you seeing me typing, I quickly paste it over and say, okay, here we go. For success, we set everything to green, for warning to yellow, and for the error, obviously to red, and info to blue. Also here with custom CSS variables. And now if we have a look in the browser, we'll see exactly that. So now you might wonder, okay, what's happening with the border? Well, the border is right now the same color as the actual background. So if we fix that real quick and set it, for example, to 700, we see this tiny border over here. And if we change it through, we get all the different types. So here's basically how you can use Tailwind to style your components without either relying on internal state that's not really shown outside, to make things more flexible but still contained enough and not saying, oh, you can change everything. Let me know. Does this kind of make sense? Does this help you out? So if you want to see more Tailwind tricks, just let me know in the comments. And of course, I hope to see you in the other videos out there. And maybe also in the Deja Vu episode where Michael and I talk about Nuxt 3.16 and Nuxt UI 3. Check that out. See you soon and happy hacking.